He thought my life's work was a rounding error, a quaint little feature on a blueprint that could be erased with a single keystroke to make room for more profit, more luxury, more excess. He didn't know that my work wasn't just on the blueprint. My work was the very legal and structural foundation his entire glass and steel empire was built upon. A foundation I had designed with a failsafe, a hidden covenant that I could legally use to condemn his prized project with a single, precisely worded email. They say God is in the details. In my world, the world of urban planning and zoning law, the devil is in the zoning regulations, the easements, and the appendices. And I'm the one who wrote the book. My name is Marisol Herrera. For 15 years, I have been the unseen architect at Sterling Developments. I don't design the soaring facades or the opulent lobbies that grace the covers of architecture magazines. My artistry isn't in steel beams or curtain walls. It's in the silent, labyrinthine corridors of Chicago's municipal code. I'm the one who transforms a billionaire's napkin sketch into a buildable reality. I am the woman on the 12th floor, surrounded by maps and legal tomes, the one who translates raw ambition into asphalt and permits. For a decade and a half, I have been invisible in the way a load-bearing column is invisible. You don't notice it. You take its strength for granted. You walk past it every day without a second thought. But if you try to remove it, the entire building comes crashing down. That Tuesday morning, the air on the 50th floor was thick with the scent of expensive leather, freshly brewed espresso, and an almost tangible smugness. It was the atmosphere of men who believed they were masters of the universe. The autumn sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the boardroom, turning the vast expanse of Lake Michigan into a sheet of hammered silver far below. I sat in my usual spot, a chair tucked away at the far end of the impossibly long mahogany table. My portfolio, filled with city maps and zoning charts, sat beside me like a loyal companion. It was a strategic position I'd perfected over the years, close enough to hear every whispered word, far enough to be completely overlooked. At the head of the table, Cadden Sterling held court. He had inherited the title of CEO from his visionary father 6 months ago, and he wore it like a costume he hadn't quite grown into yet. His father had been a builder, a man who loved the city and respected its rules. Cadden was a brand, a personality, a creature of PowerPoint presentations and shareholder calls. His presentation glowed on the massive screen behind him, a dizzying collage of glossy renderings and aggressive-looking graphs. The title was Project Ascension, Maximizing Vertical Assets. It was the kind of corporate jargon that meant only one thing: someone somewhere was about to get screwed. He paced before the screen, a charismatic predator in a $1,000 suit, his voice a smooth, confident baritone. He worked the room with the easy charm of a man who had never been told no in his entire life. The other executives, all men I had known for years, watched him with a mixture of fawning admiration and thinly veiled fear. David Chen, our brilliant but timid head of design, kept adjusting his already perfect tie, a nervous habit I'd cataloged years ago. Laura from HR was taking copious notes, but her pen hadn't actually touched the paper in 5 minutes. They were all part of the set dressing for the Cadden Sterling show, a captive audience for his monologue of disruption and synergy. As we move into Phase 2 of the Solaris Spire, Cadden began, his voice resonating with manufactured passion, we need to be bold. We need to be decisive. We are not just building a tower, we are creating a legacy. He clicked to a new slide. A breathtaking, photorealistic rendering filled the screen. It showed a rooftop infinity pool that seemed to merge with the horizon, surrounded by private cabanas, a glowing champagne bar, and impossibly beautiful people laughing against the iconic Chicago skyline. Which is why, he announced, a dramatic pause hanging in the air, I've made the executive decision to repurpose the rooftop level. My heart didn't sink. It didn't break. It simply stopped, a sudden, cold cessation of motion in my chest. Repurpose. Such a sterile, clinical word for an act of profound desecration. The original plan for a, quote, community rooftop garden, unquote, he said, physically making air quotes with his fingers, his lips curling into a faint smirk. While charming, and I'll admit, a nice little piece of PR in the early stages, is simply not an optimal use of our most valuable square footage. It's a net loss. Instead, we will be installing the Sky Club. An exclusive, members-only experience that will not only redefine luxury living in the city, but will also generate an estimated 8 figures in annual revenue. A murmur of impressed approval rippled through the room. 8 figures. That was the only language these men understood. They didn't understand the 3 years of painstaking negotiations with city planners. They didn't remember the heated town hall meetings where I personally promised the residents of the neighborhood that this tower would give something back, that it would not be another sterile fortress for the 1%. They had forgotten that the community garden wasn't just a feature on a list of amenities. It was a promise. A legally binding promise that had secured us the crucial zoning variances needed to build the tallest residential tower in the Western Hemisphere. The budget from the Compliance and Planning Department, he continued, his eyes finally, briefly, flicking in my direction. They were cold, dismissive eyes that skated right over me as if I were a ghost. That budget will be repurposed to fund the initial demolition and construction phase of the Sky Club's development. He had stolen my budget. He had stolen my project. And he had stolen the soul of the building in a single, arrogant sentence. I didn't flinch. I didn't gasp. I didn't allow a single flicker of the icy rage that was now solidifying in my veins to show on my face. I had learned long ago that in rooms like this, a woman's anger is dismissed as hysteria, while a man's is respected as strength. I simply held his gaze, my expression a carefully constructed mask of professional neutrality. I understand the financial priorities, I said, my voice perfectly even, betraying nothing. Relief, visible and immediate, washed over his handsome features. He'd mistaken my silence for submission. He thought my calm was consent. He was a fool. Excellent, he said, turning his back on me to address the board once more. I knew I could count on you to be a team player, Marisol. A team player. For a moment, I almost laughed. I had been playing a game he didn't even know existed. A game whose rules were not written on glossy PowerPoint slides, but in the dense, forgotten, and legally ironclad pages of municipal code. As the meeting finally adjourned and the executives filed out, high on Cadden's vision of 8-figure revenues, he stopped me by the door. He placed a heavy, patronizing hand on my shoulder. Don't take it personally, Marisol, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It's just business. I looked up at him and gave him a small, polite smile. It was the smile I had perfected over 15 years. The kind of smile that says, I am a competent, non-threatening woman who understands her place. I file paperwork and I follow orders. The kind of smile that poses absolutely no threat at all. Of course, Cadden, I said softly. Business is business. Back in the quiet, dusty solitude of my 12th floor office, I locked the door. The sound of the bolt sliding home was a gunshot in the silence. Surrounded by filing cabinets filled with the city's secrets and rolled-up blueprints that told the story of every brick laid by Sterling Developments for the last 30 years, I finally allowed myself to feel the cold, precise anger I had suppressed. He had called my life's work charming. He had called a legally binding covenant with the city of Chicago a rounding error. He had forgotten the first rule of construction, a rule his own father had taught me. Before you can build into the sky, you must have an unshakable foundation on the ground. And I owned the foundation. I walked over to a tall, metal filing cabinet in the far corner of the office, a relic from a pre-digital age that no one else ever touched. I spun the combination lock, the familiar clicks echoing in the silent office. Inside, nestled among old, forgotten plans for projects that were now landmarks, was a heavy-duty cardboard tube sealed with a red wax emblem of the city seal. The label, written in my own hand from a decade ago, read, Solaris Master Plan Final Zoning Covenant. This was not a weapon forged from anger. It was a shield forged from foresight. 10 years ago, when Cadden's father, Arthur Sterling, was still CEO, the company was on the verge of collapse. A rival firm had filed a massive lawsuit that threatened to halt the Solaris project before a single shovelful of dirt was turned. The board was panicking. The high-priced lawyers were useless. But I, the quiet woman from the planning department, spent a weekend fueled by black coffee and sheer determination, digging through a century of city ordinances. I found it on a Sunday morning, a forgotten, obscure city law from the 1970s concerning the transfer of air rights that not only invalidated our rival's lawsuit, but also gave us the legal leverage to build 10 stories higher than originally planned. We didn't just win, we dominated. We saved the company hundreds of millions of dollars and secured its future. Arthur Sterling, a man who understood the value of loyalty and intellect, had called me into his office. He offered me a promotion, a massive raise, a corner office. I want protection, I told him, pushing the offer letter back across his desk. Not for me, for the project, for the city. He thought I meant a new insurance policy. I meant something far more permanent. My lawyer, a brilliant, shark-like woman named Eleanor Vance who specialized in the brutal world of land use law, helped me craft it. We called it the Solaris Covenant. It was a masterpiece of legal engineering, a clause so dense and wrapped in legalese that it was designed to be overlooked. We buried it deep within Appendix D, subsection 9 of the 1,000-page master plan that was filed with the city. On the surface, it looked like standard boilerplate about ensuring public access. But underneath, it was a time bomb with a hair trigger. I carefully broke the wax seal and unrolled the stiff parchment on my large drafting table. The original document, bearing the embossed city seal and the signatures of the mayor and planning commissioner from 10 years ago. My finger, trembling slightly, traced the critical passage, the words I knew by heart. In the event that the designated public amenity space, specifically the 20,000-square-foot community rooftop garden as detailed in Exhibit 7A, is unilaterally reduced in size or altered in its primary purpose, without a mandatory 6-month public review period and a subsequent supermajority vote from the City Planning Commission. The building's master certificate of occupancy shall be subject to immediate and indefinite suspension pending a full structural and regulatory compliance audit. The beauty of it was its lethal precision. Unilaterally, Cadden hadn't consulted anyone but his own ego. Immediate and indefinite suspension. Those 4 words were a death sentence for a multi-billion-dollar project on the verge of completion. And the final clause, the one Eleanor had called the kill shot, was even better. Individual who files the official notice of breach with the Department of Planning and Development shall be granted, by the authority of the City of Chicago, a 72-hour window of unrestricted access to all project documentation, including but not limited to internal communications, financial records, contractor agreements, and structural engineering reports, for the sole purpose of gathering and compiling evidence for the Commission's review. Cadden hadn't just broken a promise. He had triggered a protocol. He had just handed me the keys to his entire kingdom and 72 hours to find every single one of his skeletons. I sat down at my computer, my movements now calm and deliberate. The email to the City of Chicago's Department of Planning and Development was already written. I drafted it years ago as a doomsday contingency, updating the legal references every 6 months. The subject line was simple, professional, and utterly devastating. Notice of breach, the Solaris Covenant, Permit 774, My finger hovered over the send button. This wasn't just an email. This was a declaration of war, written in Times New Roman, 12-point font. I thought of Cadden's dismissive smirk in the boardroom, his certainty that I was just another cog in his machine, a powerless woman grateful for her little desk on the 12th floor. Click. The email vanished from my outbox at 4:05 p.m. on a Friday, the perfect time to detonate a bomb. At 4:06 p.m., my desk phone rang, the caller ID flashing City of Chicago legal. I smiled and let it go to voicemail. Next, I logged into Sterling's internal project management system, Procore. Usually, my access was a small, walled garden of zoning files and permit applications. But the Covenant was already working its silent, devastating magic through the city's servers. A red notification box popped up on my screen, a message I had never seen before. Access level escalated by municipal mandate. Special investigator. 71 hours, 58 minutes, and 45 seconds remaining. Folders began to bloom across my screen like a time-lapse video of a poisonous garden. Folders with names I was never meant to see. Executive communications, financial overruns, structural engineering change orders, internal audits confidential. I had spent 15 years building this company's foundations. Now, it was time to conduct a full structural inspection and see how many cracks Cadden Sterling had put in them. The system flared to life, not with a bang, but with the silent, overwhelming cascade of newfound authority. It was like standing in a dark library and suddenly having every book, every page, every footnote illuminated at once. My new credentials, flowing directly from the city's servers into Sterling's network, reclassified me. I was no longer Marisol Herrera, employee. I was Municipal Mandate Special Investigator M774B. I was a ghost in their machine, with the power to walk through walls. For 2 years, ever since Cadden's ascent and the subtle shift in the company's culture from one of civic pride to ruthless profit, I had been preparing for a moment like this. Not for revenge, not initially, but for survival. I had spent countless late nights in my quiet home office, not reviewing zoning codes, but mapping the company's complex network architecture. I taught myself how the document management system spoke to the engineering servers, how the email archives shared authentication protocols with the board's private, encrypted portal. It was all a web, and I had just been handed the master key. I started with the money. It's always the best place to start. It leaves the clearest trail. I bypassed the sanitized reports prepared for the board and went straight for the raw data in the accounting servers. I opened the financial projections for Cadden's vainglorious Sky Club. The numbers made me whistle, a low, soft sound in the silent office. It wasn't just the $2.4 million budget for demolishing the garden's structural foundations, which was already absurdly inflated. It was the line items. $500,000 for a design consultant I had never heard of, Ethelstone Design Group. Another $1 million for custom fixtures, sourced from Italy through a third-party procurement agent. And here was the kicker, the detail that made my blood run cold. He had given the project a retroactive budget increase just last month, a move he justified in a memo as necessary to expedite the new timeline. This increase was approved on the same day he signed the order to cut my department's operational funding for the next fiscal year by 40%. I started taking screenshots, my movements methodical and precise. I wasn't just capturing images, I was capturing metadata, timestamps, user IDs. I was creating a digital chain of evidence with the calm precision of an archaeologist documenting a crime scene. Every file was a brick, and I was building a case that would not just expose him, but entomb him. My phone rang, the screen displaying Laura from HR. I let it ring twice, a small courtesy, before answering. Her voice, usually so smooth and controlled, was strained with a false pleasantry that was almost painful to hear. "Marisol," she began, we just received a rather alarming notification from the city. It seems there's been some sort of misunderstanding regarding the Solaris project." "There is no misunderstanding, Laura," I said, my voice perfectly calm. I swiveled in my chair to look out at the sprawling city below. Appendix D, subsection 9 of the Solaris Master Plan. I am exercising my contractual and municipal rights as stipulated in the legally filed covenant. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by the frantic, desperate clicking of a keyboard. I'm not familiar with that subsection, Marisol. It must be some old boilerplate." "It's on page 1428 of the master plan, Laura," I said, knowing full well she and her entire department would spend the rest of the night trying to find a physical copy of a document I had made sure was archived deep in the city's records. "I will need all documentation related to the budget reallocation for the rooftop level, including all internal memos and email approvals, sent to my secure municipal portal by the end of the day. As per my mandate." "Marisol, surely we can sit down and discuss this reasonably. If this is about your department's budget cuts, I'm sure we can find a compromise." "This is about the process, Laura, or the lack thereof," I said, my voice hardening slightly. 71 hours and 12 minutes remaining. I hung up before she could formulate another empty platitude. Outside my window, the Friday evening traffic was beginning to build on Lake Shore Drive, a glittering river of red and white taillights flowing into the twilight. Thousands of people heading home, oblivious to the small, silent war being waged 50 stories above their heads. My computer pinged. It was a system notification. "New folder access granted, Executive Assistant Archives." I didn't go for Cadden's emails directly. That was too clumsy, too obvious. He would have his assistant scrub them. But assistants, especially executive assistants, are the central nervous system of any corporation. They see everything, they schedule everything, and most importantly, they save everything. They are the keepers of the institutional memory. I ran a simple keyword search within his assistant's archived emails for the past year. Rooftop, Garden, Herrera. A thread from 3 months ago popped up instantly. The subject line was discretion required. It was from Cadden's assistant to the chief financial officer. The message was brief and chilling. "Per Cadden's direct order, this is to be kept under wraps until after the Q2 investor call. He says the optics would be bad if they knew we were ditching the public amenity for another luxury space before the final building permits are issued. Please ensure all related invoices are coded under General Structural Maintenance Phase 1. And then the footnote that sealed their fate. Delete after reading. A sweet, naive thought. Nothing is ever truly deleted when a special investigator has root access to the Exchange server. I switched screens, my fingers flying across the keyboard, pulling up the engineering and procurement servers. It was like peeling back the skin of the company to see the sickness underneath. A constellation of folders materialized, a corporate subconscious laid bare. Draft plans, abandoned proposals, and then a folder labeled simply Project Ascension. My fingers froze on the keyboard. I'd heard whispers of it in the hallways, hushed conversations that stopped when I approached. A company-wide restructuring. Layoffs, but the folder was enormous. 10 gigabytes of spreadsheets, contracts, and confidential memos. I opened the executive summary, a 50-page document authored by Cadden himself. My coffee went cold beside me as the full, brutal scope of his vision became clear. This wasn't just a restructuring. This was a demolition. Entire divisions, ones that had been the backbone of the company for decades, were scheduled for elimination. Outsourcing our most experienced, unionized engineering teams to a non-union firm based in Texas known for cutting corners. And at the bottom, on page 48, in a footnote so small it was a calculated insult, Department of Planning and Compliance to be reduced by 90%. Core functions to be automated by Q4. My department. My people. The young planners I'd mentored straight out of college, the seasoned veterans who could recite obscure city codes from memory, the people who had dedicated their lives to building this city the right way. All of us, reduced to a line item in Cadden's ruthless equation for maximizing shareholder value. But in their arrogance, they had made one fatal, unforgivable error. They had forgotten that before you automate compliance, you should probably make sure you are, in fact, compliant. I minimized the Ascension files, my heart now beating a slow, steady drum of cold fury. I opened a new query, casting a wider, more targeted net. Any contract bearing Cadden Sterling's digital signature from the past 6 months that contained the word Ethelstone. The result was instantaneous. A single PDF. Ethelstone Materials Supply Agreement. 42 pages of dense, technical jargon. Ethelstone was the firm hired to supply the specialized, high-tensile steel for the new rooftop construction. Normal enough on the surface. Except for Appendix C, the payment schedule. A single payment of $15 million authorized by Cadden's signature to Ethelstone Materials LLC, a company registered at a P.O. box in Delaware. A company whose parent corporation was a holding firm, which was in turn owned by a private trust. A trust whose sole beneficiary, as confirmed by a quick search in a database I had access to through my municipal credentials, was Cadden Sterling himself. He hadn't just hired his own company. He was supplying his own project with materials. And a quick cross-reference of the steel specifications in the Ethelstone contract against the original engineering plans approved by the city revealed the terrifying truth. It was a cheaper, lighter, lower grade of steel. It didn't meet the city's stringent safety standards for wind shear and load-bearing capacity in a building of that height. He wasn't just lining his own pockets. He was actively, knowingly compromising the structural integrity of the building to do it. He was putting thousands of future residents and the public at risk. I took a screenshot, then another. The system authentication log showed he had personally accessed and modified the final engineering report 3 times in the past month, overriding the chief engineer's initial, more stringent specifications. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "This is Jim Harrington from Sterling Legal. We need to meet. Now, this is not a request." I typed back a simple, ice-cold reply. All communications must be directed through the City of Chicago's legal department for the duration of my 70-hour mandate. I then powered the phone off and dropped it in my desk drawer. My final search of the night took me to the board's private portal. Their emails were supposed to be on an air-gapped, impenetrable server. But the Solaris Covenant didn't care about firewalls. It was a municipal override, a digital battering ram. The very first thread I found made me laugh, a short, bitter, humorless sound in my empty office. The subject line was simply, "The Herrera Problem." It was an email from Cadden to the chairman of the board, Gary. As discussed, Cadden had written, the Marisol situation needs to be handled delicately. She's too attached to that ridiculous garden. We'll eliminate her department as part of Project Ascension. We'll frame it as a necessary cost-cutting measure. She's not the type to make a fuss. Not the type to make a fuss. I saved that email to 3 separate, encrypted locations on my secure cloud drive. Then, I accessed our automated legal hold system, a beautiful, powerful piece of software I had championed and implemented 5 years ago. With a few keystrokes, I placed an undeletable, system-wide hold on every file, email, and document related to Project Ascension and Ethelstone materials. The city lights were a glittering, indifferent carpet spread out below me. Somewhere in this building, or in their sprawling mansions in the suburbs, a group of very powerful men were just beginning to realize they had kicked a hornet's nest. But they thought it was just one hornet. They hadn't realized I was about to give the entire nest a copy of the building plans, the financial records, and the keys to the front door. I opened my personal, secure cloud storage and began the upload. Gigabytes of meticulously organized evidence flowing like a silent, digital river from their servers to mine. The work that had made me invisible for 15 years was now making me invincible. My computer chimed. It was a new email, flagged with the highest possible priority, from the chairman himself. Ms. Herrera, it began. I believe there has been a significant and regrettable misunderstanding. I am confident that we can find a resolution that is beneficial to all parties involved. Beneficial to all parties. I dragged his email into the evidence folder without a second thought. They had just realized their mistake. You don't bulldoze the garden of the woman who wrote the map to the whole city. Not unless you want to find out where all the sinkholes are buried. And I was just getting started. Saturday morning arrived with a cold, gray light that seemed to drain the color from the city. I had spent the night in my office, not out of necessity, but out of a sense of profound, focused calm. For 36 hours, I had been a digital phantom, a silent excavator of corporate rot. I had downloaded and cataloged 4 terabytes of data, every contract, every altered report, every damning email. But it was the patterns that emerged from the data that were truly horrifying. A web of deceit, greed, and a reckless disregard for human life that extended far beyond a single rooftop garden. The first secret I unearthed was about our chief legal counsel, Patricia Morse. For years, she'd been receiving quiet payments from one of our primary concrete suppliers, a company we'd used in 3 high-rise projects. In return, she had systematically buried engineering reports that questioned the concrete's integrity under seismic stress. It was a ticking time bomb buried in the foundations of our city. The second secret was worse. I found the unredacted exit agreement for the old CEO, Arthur Sterling. He hadn't just been forced out for opposing Cadden's profit-at-all-costs strategy. He had discovered Cadden was using shell companies to buy contaminated land on the city's south side, then using his political connections to get it rezoned for residential development without proper environmental cleanup, poisoning the very communities he claimed to be revitalizing. Arthur's golden parachute was hush money, secured by a non-disclosure agreement so vicious it was practically a gag order. But the third secret, the one connected to Ethelstone materials, was the showstopper. Cadden wasn't just profiting from selling his own substandard steel to the Solaris project. He had used the same scheme on 2 other projects, one in Dubai and one in Singapore. He had created a global supply chain of fraud, putting thousands of lives at risk across 3 continents. I compiled it all, not into an angry email, but into a calm, meticulously annotated 150-page report. I titled it simply, A Comprehensive Audit of Structural and Ethical Compliance at Sterling Developments. I then did something they would never expect. I didn't send it to the board. I sent a password-protected copy to the city's lead structural engineer, to the investigative desk at the Chicago Tribune, and to my lawyer, Eliner. The password would be released at 9 a.m. on Tuesday, the morning of the public hearing. The weekend was a blur of panicked, unanswered calls. They sent a courier to my apartment with a cease and desist letter, which my doorman politely refused. They sent another with a settlement offer that started at 7 figures and climbed with each subsequent, desperate email. It was like watching a cornered animal try to chew its own leg off to escape a trap it didn't understand. Sunday evening, as the city lights began to prick the deepening twilight, I finally took a call from Gary, the chairman of the board. His voice, usually so commanding, was thin and reedy with desperation. "Marisol, for God's sake," he pleaded, "what do you want? Name your price. We can make this all go away." I stood at my apartment window, looking out at the skyline I had helped shape, the buildings standing like silent, stoic witnesses. "There is no price, Gary," I said, my voice quiet but unshakable. "You can't buy your way out of putting a $15 million lie at the top of a 90-story building. This isn't about my budget or my garden anymore. This is about the hundreds of families who will live in that building, trusting that it won't collapse on them in a high wind. I'm not turning on the lights anymore, Gary. I'm sounding the fire alarm. I hung up. Tuesday morning at Chicago City Hall was a media circus. The air in the grand hearing room was thick with the weight of old stone, anticipation, and the glare of TV lights. It felt less like a zoning meeting and more like a corporate coliseum. The entire Sterling board was there, a row of grim-faced men in dark suits. Cadden sat beside them, a smirk still plastered on his face, a final, defiant act of arrogance. He thought he could spin this, that his army of high-priced lawyers could drown my claims in a sea of legal jargon. He still didn't understand. I walked to the public podium alone. No lawyer beside me, just a single, thick binder on the lectern in front of me. I looked out not at the board, not at Cadden, but at the assembled commissioners and the crowded public gallery. "My name is Marisol Herrera," I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone. "For 15 years, I have been the head of planning and compliance for Sterling Developments. My job is to ensure that what we build is not only beautiful, but safe, and that we honor the promises we make to this city." 6 days ago, I was informed that a legally binding promise, the Solaris Community Garden, was being broken in the name of profit. Cadden's lawyer stood up. "Objection. This is a private internal matter for the company." The commission chair, a stern woman I respected immensely, cut him off. "This is a public hearing regarding the structural and regulatory compliance of the city's tallest residential building. Ms. Herrera has the floor. Sit down, counsel." I opened my binder. "This is not about a garden," I continued calmly. "It is about a pattern of reckless endangerment and corporate fraud orchestrated by CEO Cadden Sterling." For the next 45 minutes, I walked them through it. I presented the Ethelstone contracts, the evidence of Cadden's ownership. I showed them the original, city-approved engineering specifications for the rooftop steel, and then I showed them the weaker specifications from the Ethelstone contract. I put the two documents side by side on the overhead projector, the damning numbers glowing for all to see. And then, for the finale, I presented a video. "With the help of an independent structural engineering firm," I explained, "we ran a simulation. This is what would happen to the proposed Sky Club, built with the unapproved Ethelstone steel, under a 90-mile-per-hour wind load, a weather event Chicago experiences on average once every 5 years." The room fell silent as the simulation played on the giant screens. The rendered steel beams of the rooftop structure began to twist and buckle in slow motion, a catastrophic failure cascading across the top of the building. The room filled with a collective gasp. It was no longer about numbers on a page. It was about a terrifying, preventable disaster. As the video ended, a single notification pinged on the phones of every reporter in the room. "Right on schedule." I saw them look down, their eyes widening. The Chicago Tribune's headline had just gone live. "The Solaris deception. Sterling Development's CEO implicated in massive fraud, endangering thousands in city's newest supertower." The chaos was immediate, but before the board or their lawyers could react, a man in a dark suit stood up from the front row. "Madame Chairwoman," he said, his voice carrying an undeniable authority, "I am Assistant Attorney General for the state of Illinois. Based on evidence provided to my office, we are hereby launching a full criminal investigation into Cadden Sterling and Sterling Developments for reckless endangerment, wire fraud, and conspiracy." In an instant, the room went from a hearing to an arraignment. 2 plainclothes officers approached the Sterling table. Cadden's smirk finally vanished, replaced by a mask of pale, slack-jawed disbelief. As they led him away, his eyes met mine across the room. There was no anger in them. Just the hollow, empty look of a man who had finally, fatally, underestimated his opponent. The city council voted unanimously to suspend Sterling's building license indefinitely. The company's stock plummeted 70% before the market closed. Project Ascension was dead. The board was dismantled. The entire edifice of lies Cadden had built came crashing down, not with the roar of failing steel, but with the quiet, final rap of a gavel. In the weeks that followed, the full extent of the rot was exposed. The SEC launched its own investigation. The contaminated land deals came to light. The city began a top-to-bottom review of every building permit Sterling had been issued in the last 5 years. The new interim board offered me Cadden's job, CEO of Sterling Developments. They offered me a staggering salary, stock options, the corner office on the 50th floor. They thought that was what I wanted. Power. Vengeance. I turned them down. Instead, I took a meeting with the mayor. I didn't want to run a broken company built on lies. I wanted to ensure this never happened again. 2 months later, the mayor's office announced the formation of a new, independent city agency, the Office of Urban Accountability, a watchdog with unprecedented power to audit major development projects, to protect public interests, and to hold corporations to their promises. They asked me to be its first director. 2 years have passed. This morning, I took the elevator to the top of the Solaris spire. The building was finally completed, under the strict supervision of my office and a new, more responsible development team. I walked out onto the rooftop, not into an exclusive club, but into the Solaris community garden. It was beautiful, filled with native prairie grasses, the scent of lavender and damp earth, and the sound of children's laughter from the public playground in the corner. Residents from the building and families from the neighborhood were mingling, reading on benches, enjoying the breathtaking view that belonged to all of them. My work here is done. From my new office at City Hall, I have a view of the entire Chicago skyline. I no longer see just buildings. I see a complex ecosystem of promises, responsibilities, and trust. I am no longer the invisible woman on the 12th floor. I am a guardian of that trust. Cadden Sterling and his board made a simple, fatal mistake. They forgot that the strongest structures aren't built on steel and glass, but on promises kept. They looked at me and saw a problem to be managed. They never realized I saw the entire city as my blueprint, and I will not allow anyone to compromise the foundation again.